welcome to another edition of the Cut Pro Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Zelia, conspicuous by his absence, but not too conspicuous is Emerito Rivera. He is off this week, and this week, Ring of Honor star Mike Bennett joins the show to discuss a host of topics, including his run in WWE, his run in Impact Wrestling, his first and second stint now of Ring of Honor, and growing up a wrestling fan. We discuss who he grew up watching, who he idolized, what his experiences were, and the telling line and the underlining theme of this interview is the comment he made about being a sports entertainer compared to being a pro wrestler. I promise you will like the show. This is one of our better interviews. Very sorry that M was not available. He had a lot of different projects he's been involved with. He will be back next episode. I promise. I hope I do an okay job filling in without him here. You can follow the Cut Pro Wrestling Podcast on all your social media platforms, including Instagram, the Cut PW Podcast, Twitter, the Cut Wrestling BSP, and Facebook, the Cut Pro Wrestling Podcast. And of course, subscribe to us on YouTube and Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio Podcast Network. We are everywhere, but I think you are tired of hearing from me. Let us now hear from Mike Bennett. All right, back here on the Cut Pro Wrestling Podcast, Randy Zelia, conspicuous by his absence, Emerito Rivera. He is on assignment this week, taking care of some business. But joining me right now, Ring of Honor superstar Mike Bennett. And Mike, I almost want to not say superstar anymore. I want to go back to what's supposed to be Ring of Honor pro wrestler. Let's say it together, pro wrestler.
Oh, it has such a better tone to it. It just brings me happiness when I hear pro wrestler.
Well, you've certainly had your share of adjustment going back to pro wrestler over the last year and a half. Going back to Ring of Honor, where you had a quite a bit of success, and but you seem a lot happier right now.
Yeah, I am. It's one of those things where you chase a dream for so long, and then you have tunnel vision about getting to that dream. And for me, it was always WWE or bust. That's what I dreamed of. That's what I wanted to do. And I was fortunate enough that along that journey, I worked for Ring of Honor. I worked for New Japan. I worked for Impact. And along that journey, I discovered that the dream that I wanted wasn't what I thought I wanted. It was something entirely different. I wanted to be a pro wrestler. I thought I wanted to be a sports entertainer. I did it and then went, no, this isn't for me. I like the sport of pro wrestling.
Well, before we jump into the sport of pro wrestling, let's go give some people a little bit of background if they don't know your full story. You grew up in Massachusetts. When did you really fall in love with the sport of professional wrestling?
So I was always a fan. And then I kind of fell out of love with wrestling like around 7 or 8 years old. Like I was a Hulkamaniac, did all that crazy stuff, kind of fell out of love with it. And then around the Attitude Era, all my friends were watching. And so I had to tune in. So I tuned in and I fell in love with like Stone Cold and DX and Kane and Undertaker. But then my dad actually took me to see Monday Night Raw taping in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I was there when Mick Foley won the world title for the first time.
Oh, you were in the building for that? Oh, my Lord.
I was there. I was like 6 rows back. I fell. And from that point on, I was like, I'm going to be a pro wrestler. I'm absolutely going to be one. Told my dad, and I've never looked back ever since. I think I was 12 at the time. Never looked back ever since.
How did you go into your training? Like, how did you approach a wrestling school? Did you go? We had somebody on who said they looked at PWI and they made a phone call and they spoke with them. I think that was Rory Fox. Rory said he found less stature school and he got on the phone with them and he got the information. How did you find your wrestling school?
So I went on and did like some sort of a search engine. I mean, it was like 2000 at the time, 2001 when I started training. So I was looking online, but it's not like what we have now where you can find mass amounts of things. You have to be somewhat savvy, but still understand. And so I was just looking up wrestling schools nonstop and in my area because I wasn't going to travel outside of Massachusetts. I was only 15. So I found a school that was willing to take me if my parents, signed a waiver waiver saying I was allowed to. And I found a school in New Bedford, Massachusetts. It's called Yankee Pro Wrestling. It's now Top Rope Pro Wrestling, or Top Rope Promotion. Sorry. And they started training me a little, but along that journey, I wasn't even, I think, a year in training with them. I met Bob Evans, and he had a school. And so I started training with Bob Evans, and that's when my training really started taking off. Bob started introducing me to the right people, started teaching me the right way. And so it was really Bob Evans who kind of gave me that kickstart in my career.
And we're not talking about Bob Evans, the guy who owns the restaurants. We're talking about Bob Evans.
Who owns the restaurants. No, brutal Bob Evans, the professional wrestler.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, we just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. And what was some of the what are some of the things that he said to you that really stuck with you as far as advice or just the approach that he gave you?
So for the first, I don't want to say it was a year because it wasn't even a year, but for the sake of this story, it's the first year of my training at Yankee Pro. I was learning the stuff. I was learning how to bump. I was learning how to hit the ropes, all that stuff. I was learning different moves, but I wasn't learning why to do everything. I wasn't learning the story of a match. I wasn't learning the psychology of a match. I wasn't learning how to get the fans to interact the most with you during a match. Bob kind of took my raw ability, if you will, and he showed me what you do to really draw the fans in, why you do this, why you do that. Like kind of like the ABCs of professional wrestling is what Bob really taught me.
What was it like for you when you walked into the ring for the first time, just for the training? Was it what you expected it to be?
It's I don't know who said this, so I don't want to get it wrong, but I think it was Booker T, so I want to give him credit for it. He said when he stepped foot in the ring, it was a place that he had never been, but he felt like he had always been. And that's exactly how I felt when I first stepped in the ring. I had never been there, but it felt like home to me. It had felt like, yep, this is where you want to be. And I picked it up pretty quickly. I picked up how to bump. I picked up how to run the ropes. I picked it up pretty quickly. And I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that I was kind of watching Tough Enough at home and then taking bumps in my backyard on a cardboard box the way they were teaching it on Tough Enough. So maybe I had like a leg up in the game. It always felt like home to me stepping in a ring.
What memories do you have from your first match? Do you remember how nervous you were? Do you remember on how confident you were? Or basically, so take us back to that mind frame you had during your first match.
Funny story about my first match. I don't remember most of it because I was completely unconscious. I was knocked out. The guy I was wrestling picked me up for a power bomb. I didn't know how to take it. I got halfway up and he dropped me right on my head. And I finished the match somehow, but I don't remember it at all. I have little tiny like portions of it that I have memories of, but it's all like this entire dream sequence. The only time I remember after that is waking up, or I was conscious, but I came to in a hospital because my dad took me to my first show. And then when I got into the car for him to drive me home, I was speaking gibberish, asking him if it was Christmas, what year it was, blah, blah, blah. So he was like, yeah, we better take you to the hospital. So that's my first recollection, was waking up in the hospital being like, what happened? No recollection of that match whatsoever.
How old were you at that point?
I think I was either 16 or 17.
Wow, like that's such a young age to start training for pro wrestling. I always thought that it had to be an 18 to 19-year-old age limit on that. So I guess back then it wasn't that way. Like again, I'm so uneducated on that part of it. So you know,
it really just depends on what school you go to. There are a lot of schools that say 18 plus, no ifs, ands, or buts. There are some schools that'll say 16, but you have to have adult supervision. The adult has to sign a waiver. Back when I was doing it too, wrestling wasn't as the world wasn't as connected as it is now. So you could go and I could be 15 and sign a waiver and you think you're doing whatever. And, you don't really know what's going on. And that's kind of like what I did. But I made a deal with my parents. My parents had to drive me back and forth to New Bedford, which was like 45 minutes from where I lived. And because I didn't have a car and I didn't drive, I was still getting my learner's permit, trying to get my license. So my parents drove me. God bless them. They are the greatest parents in the world. But I had a deal with them. They said, we're going to drive you to training. We're going to support this, but you need to promise us you'll further your education while you pursue this. And I said, sure. I held my end of the bargain. They held theirs. I went and I got my associate's degree in criminal justice. And they said, you lived up to your end of the bargain. Thank you. So I owe so much to my parents. They did so much for me.
Wow. So basic. Wow. Criminal justice. You don't see many criminal justice majors going into professional wrestling. You don't. You really don't see that.
It was one of those things. My dad's a lawyer. I've always been around the law my entire life, so I have a fascination for it. I have a fascination for the Constitution, for law, for all this stuff because of my dad. So it was kind of like an easy transition where I was like, well, I already enjoy this, so I'm just going to kind of take something I enjoy and study it.
That to me is absolutely amazing. Transition back into wrestling a little bit. What was it like for you to win your first championship? Yes, independent scene, but some people look down at that. But I guess they always say when you win your first championship, it's real.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's kind of like you solidify yourself, where it's like, I'm here and I'm doing this. I don't think I ever won my first championship and was like, oh, this is a great moment because I've wanted this championship for, alphabet soup promotion at the time, XYZ or whatever. But it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, okay. I solidified myself. I'm doing this. This is real. I'm going forward with this. And I know that because there's also other people that aren't just me that clearly believe in me. If that makes sense, like there's a promoter that believes in me. There's wrestlers here that believes in me, maybe some fans. So it was more of like a commitment where you're like, okay, I'm in this, I'm doing this, and I'm going to go full steam with this.
In your mind, when you just for that moment knowing that there's a promoter that has confidence in you like that, does it validate the work that you put in?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me though, I'm one of those people that I'm never satisfied. I hate it about me, but I constantly like even when things are going good, Maria will look at me and be like, "Can't you just be happy in this moment?" And I'm like, I'm trying, but I really want to do this next." And she's like, "Yeah, but you just achieved what you really wanted to do the time before. So just sit in it and let it be happy." It's one of those things where I feel like a lot of wrestlers are like that. A lot of entertainers, a lot of people that are just driven are like that. It's like, I got what I wanted. Now what's next? What can I do next? We're kind of sick in that way.
Well, let's talk about Ring of Honor getting that first opportunity to be in a main stage promotion. Ring of Honor I don't think Ring of Honor gets the love for producing the amount of mainstream talent that it has. You had CM Punk, you had Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Seth Rollins has been there, all Cesaro, all these guys have been there. It's a great promotion, which has a lot of equity, which a lot of people don't seem to give the credit to.
Yeah, it's one of those companies that, and I fully support this, and I say this completely honestly, and I will back this up to the day I die. It's professional wrestling is the way it is right now because of Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor completely changed the game from 2002 on. It has produced stars. It has produced not only stars, but it has changed the way we view wrestling. It has changed the style of wrestling. It has changed what pro wrestling is. If you look at any company, AEW, New Japan, WWE, it is all completely littered with Ring of Honor guys, Ring of Honor alum, people that have come through that system. It is the staple. I had the privilege of seeing Carrie Silken at WrestleCon a couple weeks ago, who was the owner of Ring of Honor before Sinclair took over. And like I gave him a big hug because he is the reason I'm here. He's the reason so many guys' careers have done what they've done. Ring of Honor has kind of set the groundwork for what is going to be popular and what's going to be trendy in professional wrestling.
Do you have, up until that point, did you have a favorite match or favorite moment in the ring up until that point? Because you had been around a little bit before you made it over to Ring of Honor. You were over Top Rope Promotions from 2006 to 2014, New England Championship Wrestling for two different stints, 2003 to 2005 and 2009 to 2010. Is there any, up until that point, any things that was almost like, if you wanted to know what I can do, this is what I can do?
There was a good amount, but I had this kind of long running feud with Spike Dudley at Top Rope Promotions. He was becoming the trainer there, and I had just moved back from training at OVW, and they kind of put me and him together, and we just constantly had this chemistry in these matches. Now, a lot of them were hardcore matches, a lot of them were ladder matches, table matches, but it toughened me up and it brought something out of me that had never been brought out of me. There was a lot of blood, there was a lot of violence, but it was one of those things where at that moment in my career, I needed that. I needed to solidify myself as like, no, you're not just this indie wrestler. You're this staple. You're this guy that can do every style of wrestling. And it was really important to me to have a guy who had a name like Spike Dudley kind of put his blessing on me and give me these matches and allow me to work with him and kind of trust me in that situation. Really meant a lot to me. And it was one of those things, there was so much emotion to it that I would 100% tell people, go watch that. At that moment, that was Mike Bennett.
Also, Rod, you just said before about hardcore matches and OVW. Can you explain? None of us have ever really been in a hardcore match. You have. What is the mind frame, the thinking, and I guess the planning on how, like, you don't sit there saying, okay, well, I'm going to put you through a table here, and then I'm going to take a cookie sheet and hit you with this here. Can you talk about going into planning that out? What it's like? I know I'm getting very detail oriented, and I'm sorry about that, but it's just I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. That's all.
Yeah, it's a hardcore match or like a street fight or any kind of those matches. They're kind of a different beast. You have stuff that you plan out, you have stuff that you think about, but so much of it is emotion. And it's hard to tell someone in the back, like, oh, I'm going to drop you on these thumbtacks, and for them to just accept it and be like, yeah, that's a cool idea. There's so much that we do where the adrenaline's pumping out there that we just go, hey, let's do this while we're in the moment, because chances are we wouldn't do it if we weren't. It's one of those things where it's kind of a mix of both. Some of the best matches I've had when there's street fights, a lot of the craziest stuff we've done, we've kind of called on the fly because we're already beaten. We're already got the crap kicked out of us. And we gotten to the point where we're like, well, we might as well go big or go home at this point. The adrenaline's pumping. We're ready to do it. So it's really like a mix of like piecing it all together and then kind of feeling the emotion while you're out there.
What about your time at Impact? Can you talk about how you felt going at the time you were there? The company was in a little bit of a transition, sort of going through the Dixie phase, going into the Anthem phase. What was that like at that time?
As far as like everyone always has their talks about Impact at that time because of the management, and I get it. I've been outspoken about the management at that point with money and stuff like that. But at its core, everyone really cared about the product we were putting on, from talent to management to John Gaborik to David Lagana to Billy Corgan. Everyone really cared about what we were putting out there. And I think the biggest part was the talent. The talent all felt like we had something special. So regardless of what was going on monetarily or what was going on in management or all the crap that you were hearing online, you always heard like, oh, morale is really down in Impact. It was never really down. We all rallied behind each other. We all rallied behind Drew McIntyre. We all rallied behind Bobby Lashley. We all rallied behind EC3 and myself and the Hardy Boys and just Eli Drake and all these people. We knew we had something special. So we rallied behind each other because we wanted to get that product out. So I have extremely fond memories. I could have done without the BS of the money and the political game and all that crap that I hate about this industry. But at the end of the day, that locker room is hands down one of the best.
And it's funny too. You were lucky enough to have your bride with you, your lovely bride Maria, and you guys got together when you guys were Ring of Honor, and you guys really, came into like a great tandem. How important is she as far as the presentation of that?
Before I would have said she's very important, but what we're doing now, we've kind of made this decision where, okay, she joined me in 2011. We've kind of given it almost 10 years of this, of the Mike, Maria together kind of presentation. Now we're trying to see what we can do on our own. What can Mike Bennett do on his own? I know what Maria Kanellis can do on her own. She's incredibly talented. And plus, she's starting to slowly transition into this backstage role. of taking over the women's division in Ring of Honor, and really focusing on that because in her head, she's like, there will be a time where I will come on the screen and I will be needed on the screen. But in her head, she really is just focused on helping out the younger talent, the younger girls get to achieve what they want to achieve. And she knows that what's best for me right now is to go and wrestle and just be Mike Bennett, the wrestler, not Mike Bennett and Maria, the act. So that's kind of where we're at. Before it was pivotal. We were Team Sexy. We were Mike and Maria. We were doing everything. And that is like, I hold those memories so fondly. But there will be a time where we come back together. Obviously, we're married. We see each other every single day of our life. But as far as a presentation on camera, we're kind of taking it in two separate directions. It'll always be there. Everyone will always know that when there's Maria, there's Mike. When there's Mike, there's Maria. But as far as what we're doing now, it's kind of different.
I know we joked around when we first started the interview about superstar and pro wrestling. You can't not talk about your WWE stint.
Yeah.
What were some of the positives that you took away from being with the WWE?
Again, the locker room, the guys there that I met, some of the people are close to my in the world. I got to travel all the time. You can imagine. I wrestled in Saudi Arabia. Like, I never thought that would be a thing. I got to do a European tour, WrestleMania. I got to accomplish these things. But for me, the biggest thing was, and again, this is going to sound like a slight at WWE, and I know there are going to be some fans that take it that way, but it's not. Getting to WWE taught me what I didn't want in this industry. It taught me that, okay, this company is for some people. It's not for me. I want to be a pro wrestler. I want to focus on the sport of pro wrestling. I want to actually wrestle when I can. I want to have 15, 20, 30-minute matches. I'm not looking to be a television superstar. I want to be Mike Bennett, the pro wrestler, because at the end of the day, that's why I got into the industry.
And you were lucky. A lot of people are lucky enough to make that stage, and you were lucky enough to make that realization of this. Is this something that you thought you wanted your whole entire life? And then when you got it, you're like, maybe this is not as great as ever. I've heard a lot of professional wrestlers who say, oh no, we just got released from WWE. And then they realize that they can control their schedule, control a little bit more. How important was that now being a dad, that you have that downtime?
Yeah, so it was kind of like, it was one of those catch-22s because we got fired in the middle of a pandemic, which as a dad is terrifying because you're now unemployed. And it wasn't just me, it was my wife. So now as a family, you're unemployed. And your first thought is, I have to provide. I have to provide for my children no matter what. Money's not coming in anymore. What do I have to do? But as you start to get away from that and get away from that scariness of it, you start to learn like, oh, okay, I still know what I'm doing. I had a career before this. I will have a career after this. I'm going to be just fine. And then you start to get excited when you start going to shows and you go to Ring of Honor and you have matches. And your first thought is, okay, well, I got to make sure we don't do this, this, and this because so-and-so said we can't do this, this, and this. And it's written. And you go, wait, no, you can have creative freedom. Wait, so you mean if I do this move, I'm not going to get yelled at the minute I walk through gorilla position? Oh my God. And the whole world just starts to open up and you start to get very excited about it. So for me, if I didn't have kids, getting fired I probably would have been like, yippee, I'm so excited. Originally, I was like, oh God, I'm terrified. But then as you start to progress and you start to come out of that fog and that haze, you go, this is kind of awesome. I love this.
And now back at Ring of Honor, can you talk about one, like you said, being let go in the middle of the pandemic? So performing in front of no crowd, and what changes your mindset, and also talk about the mindset of the Ring of Honor locker room during this tough time.
It's one of those things where at the very first start of it, you're kind of like, this is weird. There's no crowd. But then you start to kind of maneuver and navigate your way through these matches and you learn like, okay, this is how I have to have this match. And this is how I have to do this. And if I just do this, I can keep the match interesting this way. And I shouldn't do this because then it'll be too quiet and it'll come across as awkward. So you start to really navigate like pro wrestlers do in front of a crowd. You navigate with what works and what doesn't work. And I just feel like even in the locker room, there's a lot of guys that are just so happy to be working right now. And there's like so many people are out of jobs and so many people aren't working. And for me, I know I'm like, I'll wrestle in front of nobody if it means I have consistent work coming in. I don't care. I think I'm talented enough to put on a good match in front of 20,000 people or put it in front of nobody. So I think it's just one of those things where you just kind of you adapt because you have to adapt.
And the talent that you guys have in that locker room. We had PCO on a couple of months ago, and he just said everyone just goes balls to the wall, and it's like he said you find a better organization who's giving you better action than Ring of Honor, you're not going to find one.
You can't. It's one of those things where it's like, I love Ring of Honor because it goes back to the sport of pro wrestling, and that's what we're focused on. It's hard hitting, it's high flying, it's map based, it's violence based, it's technical based, it's everything. But at the end of the day, it always brings you back to Ring of Honor. And PCO is correct. When we have these tapings, when we're in the bubble, people go all out. They go balls to the wall. Nobody pulls punches. Nobody does anything. Everyone does it like there's 20,000 people there, and it's inspiring.
What would you say was the most enjoyable, not successful, but the most enjoyable time of your career?
There's so many times that it's hard to just like pinpoint one. So many things shaped and molded me. So many times I've been with my friends and got to travel the world. But that first run in Ring of Honor is hard to beat, man. When I was there the first time and you had guys like El Generico, Kevin Steen, the Briscoes, the Young Bucks, AJ Styles, the Bullet Club, me and Taven as the Kingdom, Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Bobby Fish, like the list of guys that just goes on and on. And we were the up and comers being like, no, we're about to take over this industry. Looking back at that time now, and not only that, but all of us got to go and do Japan together. And like, it's just one of those moments where I look back and I'm like, that's going to be a time in pro wrestling a lot of people talk about.
And it's funny, you just mentioned Japan. Can you describe the difference of audiences compared to being an American crowd compared to a Japanese crowd from a wrestler perspective?
It's one of those things where the American crowd, they like their mix of entertainment, like they like their mix of haha, hokiness, gaga. They like some entertainment aspect to it. Japanese crowd, again, very sport based. They like their wrestling very sport based. And so it's like they clap out of respect. You don't get like the chants that you might. I mean, there's still chants for the guys and their names, but you're not going to get like the asshole chant. You're not gonna, like that you'll get at WWE. You're not going to get the what chant. You get very much like respect for everything you do. You run a spot, you settle down, the crowd claps for you. As the match starts to go, they might cheer for one guy, might cheer for the other guy. Then they'll settle down. They just react entirely different.
Last couple questions for you. If I had to ask you, going back to the beginning of your career and who you looked up to as a kid and your favorite match you watched as a fan growing up, what do you think that would be?
Oh man, that's a tough one. When I was a kid growing up, anything Stone Cold was in, I loved. But again, one of the craziest matches I ever watched was watching Mick Foley and The Undertaker in Hell in a Cell and seeing Taker throw him off the cell. That made me fall in love with Mick Foley. And as a kid, your taste in wrestling is totally different than when you're actually in the industry. So like for me, it was always that chaos, that mass amounts of chaos. I love seeing Stone Cold get in there and just beat the living crap out of like 10 guys, stun them all, and then just leave. Like that's what I loved when I was growing up. Now, as I got older, I fell in love with watching like Edge have matches and Christian have matches and Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker, like real technical, real quality wrestling stuff. But I still love the Carnage. The Carnage is still so much fun to me.
Did you realize up until recently with WWE Network going to Peacock and Impact having their own streaming network and Ring of Honor having a way to stream all their content, did you realize that a lot of your career is available at a fingertip?
Not until you said it right now, which is really cool to me. It's cool that I get to think my kids get to watch me whenever they want, if they want. But no, I didn't really think about that, but that's pretty awesome to think about that. Like at a click of a finger, you can be like, here's daddy when he was 25. Here's daddy when he was 32. He was cool at one point.
Yeah, I just figured I'd bring that up to you just to see, because I really thought about it the other day or yesterday. We had a couple different interviews and I mentioned that to one or two of the guys and they're just like, wow. And one of them was like, wow, I'm old if I was in all the.
Yeah, no, I think it's cool. I love it.
Real quick, let's let everybody know where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, please follow me on Twitter at Real Mike Bennett. And then follow me on Instagram. I think it's at The Real Michael Bennett. And then I just put out a documentary on YouTube. Check it out. It's on the ASY TV, Aside TV, YouTube. You can find it. The links are all over my Twitter. And then follow Ring of Honor. Please watch Ring of Honor whenever you can. Check your Sinclair networks. It's always going to be up on Fight TV or on ROHWrestling.com if you're an Honor Club member. So please watch Ring of Honor. I promise you, if you're sick of the wrestling you're watching now, you will absolutely love this.
Well, thank you, Mike Bennett, for joining the cut.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, so that was Mike Bennett. Great interview, great guy. He is probably one of the best speakers I've spoken with, and he really gets the wrestling industry. Again, he feels that he wants to be a pro wrestler, not a sports entertainer, and he was just awesome. And I really enjoyed the parts of the conversation where he talked about some of the struggles he had, and how he sort of regretted about going to Ring of Honor, and how Ring of Honor was the breeding ground for guys like Adam Cole, Seth Rollins, Cesaro, Daniel Bryan, all those guys who are stars all came from the Ring of Honor. And so he is just very proud of being a part of that platform. And I also enjoyed that question about if you realize that he was involved in every major platform now, as far as Ring of Honor streaming, Impact Wrestling streaming, and WWE Network. All of his work is there. So if you're not familiar as much with Mike Bennett outside of WWE, go check out his work now on all those streaming networks. Hey, guys, guess what? You can follow the Cut Pro Wrestling Podcast on social media. Instagram, the Cut PW Podcast. Twitter, Cut Wrestling BSP. And Facebook, the Cut Pro Wrestling Podcast. So check it out. I promise you'll like it. Also, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeart Radio Podcast Network. Until then, I'm Randy Zelia. We will see you next week on the Cut Pro Wrestling Podcast.